Rain drove sideways across the lower Rhine and turned the pasture into a single churned sheet of mud. The rope line of the temporary enclosure bowed under the pressure of bodies, men packed tight and pushed forward by the weight behind them. A stake leaned and the rope sagged. An American military policeman rammed the stake back into firmer ground with his boot and lifted his hand in a flat stop signal, holding the front from spilling through. Otto Klein reached the rope with mud crusted up his shins and a hard, dry pulse in his throat. The guard at his elbow steered him into the narrowed channel between stakes that funneled prisoners toward a canvas-covered table. Beyond the table, boards had been laid across a shallow trench, and beyond the boards a second rope line guarded a row of stations where hands moved fast over bodies, pockets, and paper. The man at the table did not rely on language. He wore the white marked helmet of the military police and kept his eyes on the flow. He flicked a folded cloth toward Otto, then pointed with two fingers. The gesture landed low, too low to be clear, and the line behind Otto released a sound that could have been laughter, coughing, or only breath. The cloth hit Otto's chest and slid, heavy with damp. Otto caught it. It was a towel, rough cotton, not a rag. That detail should have steadied him. Instead, it sharpened his suspicion. The MP pointed again, impatient, then swept his hand as if to push Otto forward and down at once. Otto felt heat flare in his face under the cold rain. The crowd pressed at his back, and in that pressure the gesture became, in his mind, a deliberate stripping away of the last boundary he still owned. He snapped his arm and threw the towel back across the table. It struck the MP's sleeve and dropped into the mud. Otto stepped toward the stake line as if the rope and the rule behind it were nothing, as if force could erase the moment. His guard yanked him sideways. Another MP moved in, baton low, body angled to block without striking. A short English order cut through the rain, then repeated, louder, to keep the cue from copying him. Raymond Sutton had been watching the choke point since dawn. He knew what one break in the rope could do to a line already near collapse. When Otto lunged, Sutton stepped in close enough to fill the space with his uniform, caught Otto's forearm, and turned him just enough to redirect momentum. He guided Otto out of the main lane and into a marked patch of ground beside the channel. Two MPs shifted a half step to create a bypass, and the flow resumed around them. Sutton's face stayed flat. He did not insult. He did not strike. He used higher, deliberate gestures now, pointing to the boards, the towel stack, the trough beyond. The message was simple: no wipe, no crossing. Otto resisted on reflex and then on pride, boots skating in mud. Sutton tightened his hold only as much as needed to place Otto on the patch and keep him there, then released him to the rope's edge where he could be seen and managed. From that holding patch, Otto did not need anyone to force him to watch. Men stepped onto the boards, took towels from the stack, and wiped faces, hands, and necks with quick mechanical strokes. Some scrubbed mud from wrists where seams trapped moisture and lice. Immediately after the wipe, they dropped the towels into a wooden trough. A chalkboard beside the trough carried tally marks, and a soldier with a stub of chalk matched the count to the rate of bodies moving through. A towel was not a personal possession here. It was a gate that opened or stayed shut. A man who completed the wipe was waved across the second rope to a search table where pockets were turned out and belts removed, then to a medic who glanced at skin and eyes, then to a clerk who wrote down names and units as best he could. The sequence was fast and rough, but it was consistent. It changed permissions in plain sight, crossed the boards, and a man entered the system, refused, and he stayed outside it. Otto saw familiar faces do it. A man from his own engineer detail took a towel, wiped his neck, and dropped it into the trough without looking toward Otto. The man could not look without stopping the flow, without drawing attention. Otto read the absence as choice. In his mind, it became betrayal, or worse, a bargain he did not want to name. That interpretation made the rope line feel less like a barrier and more like a stage, and it fed his anger back into his body. At the boards, a prisoner slipped off a plank. He dropped to his knees and then forward, head turned away from the mud as if pride still mattered even there. The men behind compressed and the rope line quivered. An MP thrust his arms out, palms down, and the front held. A medic entered through a designated gap rather than pushing through the pack. Sutton pointed to the gap and then to a fixed route along the inside of the rope, directing a litter team that waited under the canvas. There was no stampede. The team moved on Sutton's signal, slid the litter under the fallen man, and lifted in unison. Sutton kept his body between the lane and the queue, baton low, eyes hard, making sure the gap did not become an opening. The man was carried out along the fixed route, and the gap closed behind him. The line resumed, slowed but intact. Near the trough, a young American soldier made a crude sound, the kind meant to turn misery into entertainment. Sutton crossed the mud in 3 strides, put a hand on the soldier's shoulder, and turned him away from the prisoners. He spoke rapidly and low. The soldier's face tightened, then went flat. He was moved to the far end of the rope line where he could not feed the crowd's nerves. Sutton returned to the choke point without looking back. The correction was immediate and visible, and it tightened the lane in a way Otto could feel even from the side. Otto registered that even through his anger, he had expected mockery, he had expected the towel to be used as a prop. Instead, the men in charge treated it like an entry condition and treated taunting like a threat to order. That did not erase what Otto believed the first gesture had meant, but it made it hard to fight. The system acknowledged only compliance or refusal, and it recorded both. Sutton came back to Otto with a small card and a chalk mark. He made Otto stand with his boots on 2 faint lines scratched into the mud, shoulders squared to the lane. Sutton kept his gestures high, deliberately away from Otto's body, and pointed again to the boards, the wipe, the trough, the next rope. He marked the card and handed it to an MP who carried it to the clerk. A new stroke appeared beside Otto's number, and the consequence landed fast. Otto was not moved forward. He was kept in place, separated by rope and time from the moving stream. Across the lane, the engineer from Otto's detail disappeared behind canvas toward higher ground where straw had been thrown down. Otto watched him go and felt a flash of fear under the anger. The path existed. It was real. It moved men forward, into pens, into paperwork, toward care. Otto was the one outside it, close enough to smell thin soap, far enough to feel the cold settle into his clothes, while the rope bowed again under another surge. Mud never dried in the holding patch. It packed into seams and turned boots into weights. The rope line kept moving, and each surge made the nearest stake shiver. Military police hands stayed on that rope as if it could snap and cut the whole pin loose. An MP brought a second towel. He held it up where it could be seen, then pointed clearly to the boards and the wiping station, keeping the gesture high and away from Otto's body. Otto did not take it. He kept his hands tight at his sides, elbows locked, as if touch itself would concede something he could not recover. The MP waited only long enough to satisfy the rule that an option had been offered, then wrote on a small card and walked it to the canvas table. Paper moved faster than Otto did. A clerk glanced down, made a mark, and slid the card into a separate stack. Otto could not read the English, but he saw the physical fact of sorting. The line of men who wiped crossed the second rope. Otto stayed outside the system. The rain thickened. More groups arrived from the road, escorted in tight bundles by soaked riflemen. The MPs began moving prisoners not only through the lane, but away from it, toward a lower pen where runoff gathered and straw floated in thin mats. Otto was sent there late in the morning. 2 MPs guided him by the elbows, firm but not rough, along the inside of the rope. When he tried to brace and resist, not to escape but to control his own movement, he slipped. One MP tightened his grip and corrected Otto's footing rather than letting him fall. The lower pen sat in a shallow bowl. Men crouched in damp straw to keep their boots from sinking. Otto was placed near a post with a painted sign and a chalked number. An MP pointed to the post, then to Otto, then to the ground. The meaning was not subtle. A medic arrived with 2 orderlies and a battered kit. They moved along the rope, stopping at those whose posture or skin suggested trouble. Otto expected punishment for refusing the towel. The medic pressed fingers to Otto's forehead and neck, checking heat and swelling. An orderly held a thermometer in a metal case. Otto flinched when the orderly moved close, and the medic's eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in assessment. Otto jerked his head away and pulled back, loud enough that nearby men turned. 2 MPs shifted in, palms open, and guided Otto down into a crouch so the medic could work without a struggle spreading through the pen. The medic raised a hand to stop the MPs from forcing it further. He did not need a number to decide that Otto's reactions made him a management problem. He tapped Otto's sleeve, then pointed toward a separate stretch of rope where fewer men sat and where a barrel of water stood with a cup on a string. Isolation inside the pen, close enough for observation, far enough to limit contact. A strip of paper was tied to Otto's sleeve with twine. An MP wrote on it in block letters. Otto could not read the words, but he recognized the effect. The tag meant extra attention and fewer options. Men noticed. They shifted away, not out of cruelty, but instinct. A man Otto knew from his engineer detail met Otto's eyes, then looked down. Otto read it as accusation. He told himself the others thought he had bargained for special treatment, that the towel was a test of boundaries, and he had been singled out in a way that shamed them. When that same man later wiped his neck at the boards and crossed, Otto called it betrayal. In Otto's mind, the wipe became submission, and the MP at the entry became a lookout. From his new position, Otto could still see the lane. Men took towels, wiped faces, hands, and necks with quick strokes, then dropped the cloth into the wooden trough. A chalkboard beside the trough carried tally marks, and a soldier matched count to the rate of bodies moving through. Cross the boards, get searched, get marked, get written down. The sequence changed custody and permissions in plain sight, and the towel was the first hinge. Sutton tightened that hinge as the afternoon wore on. He moved down the lane, correcting his own men when gestures drifted lower or became sloppy. He kept signals high, tied to objects rather than bodies. Point to towel, point to boards, point to trough, point to the next rope. The order was the same every time, and the consistency cut down the murmurs that could turn a crowded line into a fight. The medic returned twice that day. Each time he checked the hairline and wrists where fabric trapped moisture. Each time he watched Otto's breathing. When Otto finally allowed the thermometer under the MP's steady hands, the result was normal. That should have cleared him. The tag stayed. Disruption and refusal created risk, and risk was managed by separation until paperwork could catch up and someone could certify otherwise. In the afternoon, Otto tried words instead of force. He caught a passing MP's attention with the few English terms he had and pointed to the tag, then to the boards, then made a chopping motion for remove. The MP signaled a clerk with a clipboard. The clerk listened, pencil poised, then asked for something Otto could not provide. A name spelled out, a unit, a witness who could be checked. Otto understood the shape of the demand even without the language. The clerk wanted a chain. Otto pointed toward the engineer from his detail, now behind the second rope in a different pen. The man was unreachable without opening gates. The clerk looked where Otto pointed, then shook his head and drew a line through something on the paper. The denial was procedural, not personal. It landed like contempt, and it confirmed the hard truth that Otto could not argue his way through a system built on verification. Near dusk, Sutton walked the pen lines with a lantern. He checked rope knots and spacing. He spoke with the medic close enough to hear over the rain. The medic gestured to Otto's tag and then toward the lane, then toward the crowded straw. Sutton listened, then issued a short order that changed the pen's geometry. Otto's stretch was moved closer to a floodlit corner where it could be watched, and an MP was posted there full time. Otto took the posting as confirmation of his worst reading. A guard stationed to watch him meant he was being used as an example. He did not grasp the practical reason. A man flagged for possible contagion and for disruption had to be watched to keep him from rejoining the main mass and undoing control. The towel cycle continued relentless. By night, the stack at the table had thinned. Otto saw an MP bring a crate from a truck and count towels into the stack, each one shaken once to separate it. Another MP erased tally marks and began again on a fresh section of board, careful to keep count aligned with groups moving through. Once the count did not match, the chalk stopped, the flow slowed. Sutton moved in, gaze sweeping the lane. He did not accuse at random. He held the next group at the rope and ordered a quick check of hands and belts before they crossed. The pause was brief, but it tightened everyone's nerves. Men stared at the trough as if the missing cloth were a weapon. The towel was found stuck under a plank, soaked and dark. An MP hooked it out with a baton tip and dropped it into the trough without touching it. Sutton nodded once. The lane restarted. Otto felt the meaning anyway. A single missing towel could halt the line and raise suspicion. The cloth was not soft mercy. It was control. That knowledge did not soften him, it made him dig in. If a towel could stop the lane, then refusing it was, in Otto's mind, the last leverage he had left. He sat through the night in wet straw and watched the same pattern repeat. Palms flattening to stop, fingers pointing to wipe, towels disappearing into the trough, tags appearing on sleeves, men moving only when paper allowed it. By the time the sky lightened again, Otto understood the logic with the precision of a foreman measuring a beam. The logic did not care what he believed the first gesture had meant. It cared whether he would wipe, whether he could be moved, whether he was safe to mix back into the mass. Gray morning light came with the same rain. Otto woke in wet straw and tried to stand. His knees unlocked, then failed. He caught himself on a post and felt heat roll under his skin, the kind that had nothing to do with the weather. Sweat gathered at his collar. His hands shook when he tried to wipe his mouth. The pen was tighter than yesterday. Lanes straightened with new stakes and fresh knots. The towel stack at the entry table had been rebuilt, and the trough behind the board still waited for the used cloth. Men moved through the sequence in numb silence. Point high, wipe fast, drop, count, cross. Otto's corner remained under the floodlight even after dawn. The posted MP watched him steadily, not taunting, not turning away. Otto had treated that gaze as humiliation. Now it felt like containment, a hard boundary that kept him from disappearing into the press. The medic arrived early with 2 orderlies. He went to Otto first, a palm to the forehead, fingers to the pulse. The medic's posture shifted the moment he felt the heat. He signaled for the thermometer and held up 2 fingers for time. Otto opened his mouth and let the glass stem settle. When the medic read it, he stepped back and motioned for distance. A new paper strip was tied to Otto's sleeve, replacing the old one. The ink was darker and the knot was tighter. Otto tried to insist he was fine, but the effort made him cough. The cough hurt. The medic pressed at the side of Otto's neck, then ran gloved fingers along the wrist where wet fabric clung. Otto understood the implication without the words. He had been treated as a risk because he fought the towel. Now he was a risk because his body had become one. Across the lane, the towel cycle kept grinding forward. Sutton stood by the tally board, reading marks and faces, keeping his own men's gestures high and clean. Otto watched the cloth move from stack to hand to trough and felt the bitter arithmetic. Separation had not saved him. It had held him in mud long enough for the danger to turn real. Near midday, the chalk stopped. The MP at the trough lifted an open hand. The next group froze at the rope. Boots stopped shuffling, and the rope line went still, as if the whole enclosure had taken a breath and held it. A missing towel did that. It broke the chain that let the lane keep moving. Sutton closed the system into compartments. He held one group at the first rope and another at the second, creating locked sections that could be searched without a surge. MPs checked under the planks and along the rope. They patted belts and coat seams, scraped boots, and kept hands visible. No one was struck. The discipline mattered. It kept fear from turning into panic. The count still did not match. In the trapped silence, a man behind the first rope sagged and dropped to his knees, worn down by cold and crowding. The medic moved toward him, then hesitated, watching Sutton's hands. Sutton opened the designated gap with a single gesture and pointed to the inside route, forcing the transfer to happen along a controlled line instead of through the mass. The litter team slid in, lifted the man, and slid back out without the rope buckling. The lane stayed locked, but it did not break. Sutton's gaze then moved to the side lanes and to Otto's corner, where the new tag hung on a wet sleeve. Two MPs approached with their palms open. One carried a clipboard. They pointed to Otto, then to the entry patch by the table. Otto tried to rise and folded. The MPs caught him under the arms and guided him along the inside route, away from the main press and close to the paperwork. They searched him where he stood, pockets turned out, waistband checked, seams traced. Otto did not resist. He had nothing to hide and no strength left for defiance. The search found nothing, but the lane still needed its chain restored. Sutton pointed to the towel stack, then to the boards, then to Otto. The trade was plain: comply with the entry condition, and the system could move him without breaking itself. The medic came in close, eyes fixed on Otto's face and the sheen of sweat on his skin. He indicated urgency with a sharp motion toward the isolation tent and then toward the inside route. Sutton responded with procedure. He tapped the tally board, then the trough, then the clerk's table, insisting that movement had to be legible, counted, and authorized, or the locked compartments would dissolve into accusation. Otto watched the exchange and understood it as a constraint, not a quarrel. The medic needed speed, Sutton needed order, Otto needed both. An MP held a towel out with both hands, keeping the gesture high and away from Otto's body. Otto stared at the rough cotton. 2 days ago he had treated it as an insult he could refuse. Now he could feel the fever buzzing behind his eyes and hear the crowd's tight silence behind the ropes. If he stayed outside the sequence, the medic could not move him through the lane without setting off the men who watched every exception. Otto took the towel. The towel was the line between humiliation and being processed as a person. He wiped his face and neck in the same quick pattern he had watched hundreds of times. Then his hands, where mud had packed into the creases. The cloth scraped his skin. The act felt less like cleanliness than surrender to a rule that did not care about his pride. The consequence was immediate. Sutton pointed to the boards, and the MPs guided Otto onto the planks. At the trough, Otto dropped the towel into the wooden slot. An MP watched it fall and made a tally mark. The chain closed. The lane did not fully reopen, but the compartment held, and the crowd's pressure eased by a fraction because the rule had been honored in public. Sutton had an MP recount the stack from the crate and another recheck under the planks. He rebuilt the count from verified numbers rather than guesswork, keeping the delay anchored to something visible. The missing towel did not reappear, but the lane's logic remained intact because the chain was still being enforced in the same order. The medic moved in at once. An orderly wrote on a card while watching Otto's breathing. Sutton leaned in, checked the card, then took Otto's sleeve tag and replaced it with a new one, tied tight enough to survive the mud. Sutton walked the cards to the clerk's canvas table. The clerk pulled Otto's earlier card from a separate stack, compared it, then crossed out a line, and clipped the updated card to a different pile. Otto could not read the words, but he could see his category change, and with it, his route. A man at the rope began to complain at the delay. Sutton answered with action instead of argument. He pointed to the tally board and then to the trough, making the chain visible. The complainer quieted when an MP tightened the rope and held the lane steady. On Sutton's signal, the litter team moved through the designated gap, not through the crowd. They kept to the inside route where boards had been laid and ground reinforced. Otto was lowered onto the litter with careful hands that looked impersonal until he saw what it protected: a stable lane, a controlled transfer, no rush that could turn into a crush. As they lifted him, Otto saw Sutton reset the entry posture again, forcing hands high, forcing gestures clear, forcing the towel to stay what it was. A process object, counted and recovered, not a prop. The litter carried Otto toward a canvas tent marked for isolation. The path was narrow, wet, and controlled, but it existed. Otto closed his eyes against the rain and held on to the only fact that mattered now. The door he needed opened only when he stopped fighting the chain that kept everyone alive. By late afternoon, the isolation tent became a quieter world inside the same rain. Canvas snapped in gusts, and the air held damp wool, disinfectant, and wet straw. Otto lay on a cot with a blanket drawn to his chest. His boots sat beneath the cot, mud still ridged on the leather, because nothing moved with him unless the record said it could. A clerk worked just inside the flap at a folding table. He wrote in block letters, then checked each line against the paper tag tied tight to Otto's sleeve. The medic did not rush him. He waited until Otto's breathing steadied, then pressed fingers to Otto's pulse and read the thermometer. The number went onto the form. The form stayed with the cot. The tent ran on a strict loop: observe, record, separate, repeat. Outside the flap, an MP stood with his baton down, posture squared to the rope that marked the boundary. No one crossed without a card, and no one left without a tag that matched the ledger. In a crowded pen, that rule prevented panic as surely as it prevented contagion. Wind opened the flap in brief snaps. Each time Otto saw the main lane, boards across a trench, a stack of towels, a trough for returns, a chalkboard that turned cloth into a count. Men moved through in numb rhythm. Hands stopped them. Hands released them. A wipe bought a crossing. Near dusk, Raymond Sutton came to the tent with a damp logbook under his coat. He held at the threshold so he did not compromise the isolation line. The clerk handed him Otto's transfer card and the updated condition tag. Sutton confirmed the escort names and the intake time and wrote them down in his own hand. The authority was in the paper. Sutton left the tent and went straight to the towel station. He moved the towel table closer to the boards so the cloth spent less time in hands before it dropped into the trough. He required the hour count to be copied into the ledger, not remembered. He corrected his MP's signals with brief physical demonstrations. Hands stayed high, fingers pointed to objects, never to bodies. If a man hesitated, the option was offered once. Refusal meant bypass into holding and an immediate card entry. The lane tightened and steadied. Before full dark, Sutton added a separate entry to his logbook detailing the count interruption, the compartment lock, the searches, and the controlled transfers that prevented a crush. He noted the earlier disciplinary correction that removed taunting from the rope line because the next shift needed to understand what had kept the crowd from boiling. He wanted the record to show restraint as an operational choice, not a mood. Inside the tent, Otto's fever rose in waves that left sweat at his collar and a hard ache behind his eyes. Each rise triggered the same response. The medic checked, recorded, and adjusted Otto's blanket so he didn't chill when the sweat cooled. The MP at the flap kept the inside route clear for a possible transfer. Otto understood the constraint that governed him now. A man who could not be placed on paper could not be moved safely through a crowd. On the second morning, the medic's assessment changed the tent's handling of Otto. Otto was moved to a cot with more space around it. The orderly wiped down the rail after Otto's hands had gripped it. The MP tightened the boundary and kept curious faces back. The change was not announced as a diagnosis. It was visible as procedure, and procedure carried the meaning. When Otto could sit up without swaying, the clerk returned with a fresh form and a sharpened pencil. This time the focus was identity and routing. The earlier stack of cards had tagged Otto as disruption. Sutton's lane had shifted him into a medical channel, but the tag still followed him unless the record changed. Otto gave his name slowly and spelled it letter by letter, watching the pencil track each mark. He kept his voice even because he had learned that agitation created suspicion. He described his engineer duty in plain terms without trying to inflate it. The clerk wrote what could be verified and crossed out what could not. Then he replaced the earlier risk mark with a new notation tied to medical isolation, a change that made Otto's next move possible without appearing like favoritism. A basin appeared at his cot with a cloth stamped for tent use, separate from the lane towels. Otto wiped his face and hands and handed it back without being asked. He watched the orderly hang it on a line designated for tent laundry. The separation of objects mattered more to him now than any story he had built around them. In a functioning system, a towel had a route. By afternoon, the medic signed a transfer slip. An MP escorted Otto out along the inside route with the card clipped to a board. At each rope gate, the escort displayed the card. At each gate, an MP checked the tag against the ledger and opened the gap only long enough for Otto to pass. No gate opened on trust alone. Otto moved slowly, legs weak, but he did not stop because he understood that stopping created a knot the rope could not absorb. They brought him to a transport point where a truck waited under a canvas cover with straw on the bed. A medic checked Otto's temperature, wrote the departure time, and clipped the slip to the card. Sutton stood nearby with his logbook and watched the chain complete. The truck did not roll until the clerk's pencil matched the medic's time and the towel count for the hour was reconciled. Hygiene accounting and movement accounting were the same kind of control. Otto climbed into the truck under his own power and sat with his back against the side rail. He held the card flat against his chest, not as comfort, but as proof that he belonged to a track that would not vanish when the next surge hit the rope. Through a slit in the canvas, he saw the towel lane one last time. A man took a towel, wiped, dropped it into the trough, and stepped across the rope. A chalk mark appeared. The cloth stayed behind. The system moved forward. As the truck lurched onto the road, Otto stopped searching faces for hidden meanings. He looked instead for what would keep men alive in a place like this. High gestures, counted returns, gates that opened only when paper allowed them. The dignity he had tried to defend as a private possession had failed him. What remained was narrower and harder, but it was real. Being processed as a person meant being legible to a disciplined chain, even when the rain never stopped.